So we're really excited to have this esteemed panel with us, and we're going to get into this evening Demystifying Corp Dev for Startups. Before we kick off the questions, though, just wanted to gauge the audience in terms of some of the subjects we're going to cover and make sure everyone will be happy. So some of the topics are going to be how to engage with Corp Dev teams, how do they source companies, best practices and mistakes to avoid, are they acquiring companies to augment existing business units versus building new ones, and common misconceptions of working with Corp Dev teams. Anyone else want to quickly raise their hand and add one or two more topics that I may have missed? Cool. All righty, so let's kick off. Before we get into some of the questions, we have 30-second overviews for each of you, and I'm going to time them. So we'll start with Debra.
I'm Debra Danielson. I am a Senior Vice President, Merger and Acquisition Strategy and Distinguished Engineer at CA Technologies. I've been at CA Technologies for a really, really long time. I'm doing a whole variety of different things, which ended up in putting me into the corporate development organization about 4 years ago. I have a primarily technical background, and my focus is on helping with the scouting and assessing companies, particularly from a product and technology perspective. And then I have a primary responsibility for the technical diligence of the companies during the deal process itself.
Great.
Hi, so Helder Antunes with Cisco Systems, 18 years and counting, so similar to Debra, similar path. Ran various technology programs, business units, and then joined Corp Dev about 18 months ago. My primary function is to also mine technology and actually enable proof of concept projects around the Horizon 2, Horizon 3 technology. Also support the M&A activity and work very closely with the business units to ensure that we are converting all these technological opportunities into business opportunities. Prior to Cisco, a long-time Valley person, worked for a bunch of startups, including a company that was acquired by CA over 20 years ago. And so really happy to be here and hope I can answer all your questions and demystify who we are.
And I'm Andrew Stern. I'm the VP of Corporate Development for F5. So I run corporate development globally for the company. Joined about 10 years ago. I was actually a startup guy before that, did a bunch of startups, and sold the last one to F5. Agreed to stay on for a year, help with the integration, and here I am 10 years later. Turned out the company was at just the beginning of a tremendous growth spurt. A couple hundred people when I joined. We're now over 4,000 people, about $2 billion in revenue, and still growing as fast as we can hire people. So it's been a fun run, and happy to, again, just kind of be as transparent as we can about what we do and how we do it.
Great. So Andrew, let's pick on you first. It seems like every day we're reading about a new unicorn that's joining the club, and it seems also in the same vein that many of these companies are pretty early stage companies, very early traction, if any. How is this impacting your business on a day-to-day basis?
On a day-to-day basis, I mean, probably not that much, realistically. I will say that it has, I think, set some unrealistic expectations with some management teams when they're able to raise money at these billion-dollar valuations. And the reality is, if you talk to probably my colleagues, the fact that a company was able to sell 10% of the company with absurd liquidation preferences and ratchets and everything else, selling 10% of your company to someone for $100 million does not mean that 100% of your company is worth $1 billion. That may have been a good deal for the guy that got the 10% and a 2x liquidity preference, but it doesn't necessarily translate. So the math is tough. The reality is we have the luxury of being patient and being selective and being disciplined. I honestly think, and when I look at the whole unicorn thing, and you and I have actually talked about this, is that I think the real losers are the employees at these companies, because some of the valuations aren't going to be sustainable, and they're going to get recapped, and the investors will be fine, and the CEO will be fine, but the employee pool is really going to get crushed.
And Debra, so CA's had an acquisitive last couple months. Are you finding that the market is as crazy as the press would have it seem? Are you still seeing some good deals out there?
I mean, there certainly are some good deals out there. There are, as Andrew said, a lot of organizations that start out with valuations that have us walk away and maybe, come back in 6 months or come back in a year and have another conversation, a little while later and see if the expectations are a little bit more realistic. I certainly have seen that pattern take place over the last couple of years. So, our sort of typical engagement looks more like 2 pieces than one in many cases.
Got it. And playing off that Helder, so you're in the Valley, in the heart of all this. What sort of advice do you have for some of the founders in the room, playing off Andrew's feedback, in terms of before you guys even engage, which we'll get into in a second, when they're taking some of those initial financings, how should they think about that?
That's a good question. I think be realistic. It really comes down to how well you can articulate your value, right? I mean, at the end of the day, when we look at these crazy valuations, when we look at a lot of the activities that are somewhat out there, they tend to be the exception to the rule. We're a fairly large group. We see a lot of activity. We engage a lot of people, not just in the Valley, but worldwide. We actually have a very extensive network. And it isn't always the case, right? So we tend to hear about the craziness and the exceptions, but it really boils down, and as Debra stated, patience. And so from your perspective, I mean, come well prepared, articulate your value, make sure that you're actually filling a very important void for that company. So, I mean, it always adds up to value. And if you can articulate that and you're reasonable, chances are you'll probably get a deal done. On the other hand, if you're basically looking at these marquee deals and that's your guidance, and to your point, very shrewd investors are propping these things up, companies like us tend to be a bit more conservative, and we really don't close those types of deals.
Gotcha. So companies now raise Series A. They had relatively fair expectations in terms of what they went out for, and now they're thinking about their long-term trajectory. How do they get engaged, Andrew? Is it you find them? Do they find you? What's the best way?
From our perspective, I'd say we generally find them. I mean, we're a smaller company than CA or Cisco, so we've got a reasonably small patch, and so my team, we generally pride ourselves on knowing the companies in our space, and we'll, through funding announcements or relationships with VCs or whatever, we're probably going to know most of the companies, and so we'll just reach out with hey, heard you're doing great things, would love to open up the lines of communication, et cetera. And that generally works better for us. Unless you are really running a process to sell the company, which is rare after an A stage, from our perspective, hey, we want to be bought doesn't really help us. I mean, everyone has a price. It doesn't help me to know that you're for sale.
Yep. And Debra, what's the typical stage at which you guys will acquire companies, and how do you, same question, you find them or they find you?
Yeah, so we acquire companies across the entire life cycle. We acquired a small company in the last couple of years that was really not more than a startup, but they had some very interesting technology and some really strong synergy with the organization. So we went ahead and did that acquisition, and we also do, obviously we just completed the acquisition of Rally, which is a large public company. So we do it at that end of the spectrum as well. CES is a relatively large organization, and we make contacts with companies through a whole variety of different vectors. The businesses themselves are very active in sort of, as Andrew said, understanding what the landscape looks like and identifying the companies that they're interested in meeting. We have a full-time scout that spends his entire life just sort of, understanding what's new and what's happening and pursuing that. And then we, also just have, companies that come in sort of serendipitously, land through things like this or through, almost cold calling. We get introduction emails a couple of times a week from people who know us and say, hey, I know this company, and you might want to look at it. So lots of different ways.
And Helder, so Debra just mentioned scout function. Do you guys have that? And what's the purpose for startups in the room talking with you guys if they're not ready to potentially sell themselves yet?
Yeah, so I mean, we do. We have that function within the Corp Dev organization, but also very tightly coupled with the CEOs or the DEPs and fellows, which basically are sort of an augmentation of what we do. So probably similar to you guys, we use that brain trust, very similar to what you described, which is to have a very good pulse on what's relevant for the businesses, where are the gaps, what should we be looking at. But we have a little bit of a hybrid model, because now we're actually using a lot more relationships with incubators and accelerators, and we're spawning these IoT innovation centers around the world, partnering with local academia, in some cases with government, and building an ecosystem with startups to, once again, mine technology and business opportunities from all aspects of the spectrum. So in gatherings like this, it's not uncommon, as I did earlier today, to reach out and talk to somebody and say, hey, you're working on something that's of interest to us, cybersecurity or anything IoT related. So it tends to be also very network-based events like this. It tends to be friend of a friend, the Valley. We're very close to the VC community and the angel community, not just in the Valley, worldwide. I spend a lot of time in Europe. Half of my team actually is based in Hull, Switzerland, which is right outside of Geneva. So I'm always back and forth, and that's where I just came from. So forgive me if I'm a bit dazed. I'm 6 hours ahead of you guys. So it's really a combination of these factors, but it really has to map to our strategy in terms of what we're looking for. And what we're looking for obviously has different horizons. What we're looking for now is not what we're looking for in terms of disruption, Horizon 2, Horizon 3. So it's a very broad perspective.
I want to get back to that point in a second, but to the original question, what's the value then, I get for you guys, but what about for folks in the room, aside from being on the radar? I mean, do you help with go-to-market stuff, any partnerships?
If it makes sense, we do, and we have several different vehicles for that. So one, it could be solidifying, if it's of interest to us and to you guys, a relationship with an existing entity, an accelerator, an incubator, parking you in one of our IoT centers. It could even be encouraging to compete from one of the various grant challenges that we issue around the world, where we put up real money. And we actually had one on IoT security recently that was just fabulous, and a couple of folks out here competed for it and did really well. So it's like everything else. There's no guarantees, but if there's a fit, then that possibility exists that we may find a vehicle to bring you into the ecosystem.
Got it. And Andrew, playing off that point, if you think on a more, I guess, an annual basis, what % of acquisitions tend to augment existing business lines versus create new ones?
For us, almost all of the acquisitions we have done have been, and annually, it's not like we do 100 a year, so I'll look at lifetime of acquisitions. I would say mostly, we have certainly been the most successful with technology tuck-ins. I mean, that's the easiest thing for us to do, is to create new modules, new features on a very successful platform. It's something that our salespeople know how to sell, our customers know how to consume. So those tend to be the most successful, but they don't move the needle as much. We have attempted a couple times to do completely new platforms, and those have generally not been as successful for us.
And Debra, public markets right now, a lot of peers of your companies are facing activist shareholder pressure and very short-term focused thinking. How do you think about longer-term benefiting acquisitions in this environment?
Yeah, so it's always difficult in a public company to to sort of manage the growth. There's so many constraints on us. There's so many regulations. There's so many guidelines on what we can do, and we are very constrained, like many other large public companies are, to what we tell the street about and what we guide to the street about. So I don't know, we just, we have to be really, really careful. We have lots of people that, that think in the organization about the risks involved with each of the different acquisitions and, looking for potential areas that might be problematic for us and making sure that we're sailing within the guardrails, so.
Got it. So let's switch gears to now that you're in the meeting with one of you three. Helder, what's a couple of the best practices that you'd love to get out of a startup, and what would you like to learn?
So most of all, come prepared. I know it's basic, but you'd be amazed as to how many people we meet with that 10 seconds into the discussion, you're starting to look at your clock.
But what does that mean? They don't have a presentation? They don't know anything about your business?
A combination of things, right? It could be any of these things. It could be, well, we were referred by a friend of a friend, so we extended you the courtesy, and then it starts out by, they're presenting something just totally irrelevant, It's just like, okay, we're very explicit. We have a strategy. These are the things we're looking for. So again, come prepared. Bring your value-added pitch and get to the point. Again, time is short. You guys have all heard this, and Silicon Valley is brutal about this stuff. I'm sure out here it's no different. You have limited time, so you need to be able to articulate in 3 or 4 slides, what's the problem statement? What am I solving? Why am I a good fit for you guys? And how can we work together?
Playing off that, can you share an example of someone that just really knocked your socks off, that really presented well?
So actually, the latest acquisition we did, OpenDNS, was actually top-notch. It's just exactly, and they've been on our radar, and they played a little bit hard to get, and but to a certain degree, that's how you're going to command that premium. That's what's going to put you out there. It's you come with your game, and you come with everything well in hand, and you articulate your value, and most of all, articulate your value to the potential acquirer. Because to say, we're the greatest technology since sliced bread, and Google can use this, and Facebook, no. Here's why we're a fit at Cisco, right? In this case, so it's very specific data that comes and puts you on the table, and basically leaves us wanting to make you a part of our family.
And you guys probably don't want to openly share this, but it probably makes your life hard. But so let's go with Andrew. You were just saying that David was a little bit of a hard negotiator. So should people try to have multiple conversations when they start that process? Should they be speaking to all 3 of you at once and talking publicly about that to get each other nervous, or how should they play that?
If you are, if you really are starting a process you've decided for whatever reason, your board has decided that you want to sell the company, or if perhaps you've engaged with someone and you want to kind of check the market. I think my advice is really the same as your earlier question around what makes a good meeting. Sort of my pet peeve in one of our corporate foundational things when we meet with companies is just be honest, just be transparent, because it all comes out in the wash. And if you get out in front of your skis, it's just 100% of the time. But
in the same vein, you guys negotiate all day, and a startup doesn't have that sort of background and experience. So how can they kind of put their best foot forward to optimize the price a little bit, maybe?
Well, yeah. So by honesty, I mean things like don't tell me there's another bidder if there's not, because we're going to find out, and we're going to.
They'll be on a panel together at a meetup, and it'll.
Sooner than that, and your things about your revenues or things about. And specifically around the gamesmanship of driving a deal, don't create false deadlines, don't try and create, I know that you like to try and create false urgency. It's the same as when you're raising a round, right? You try and create that sense of scarcity and false urgency, but ultimately we're not going to be bullied into making an acquisition, and I think you're more likely to have us just walk away or get frustrated or maybe feel like you're not being honest with us, because one of the differences between us and VCs is we're married afterwards, right? I mean, you're going to be working with us every single day, so it really it's more of a mating process than a crazy deal negotiation.
I want to stay with you because you brought a bit of show and tell.
You want me to grab my letter? So this is I told John I brought this. So this is the worst letter, the worst email I've ever gotten. This is in the how not to respond to Corp Dev. I've always wanted to share this. This is the first time I've shared this publicly. So this was a company that I reached out to. Probably 9 times out of 10, if we reach out, we know your board, we know your VC. Through LinkedIn, I know someone. But this was a case, I ran across this company, didn't know anyone on the board, so I just emailed the guy, which happens. Open up the lines of communication. Are you up for a quick introductory call sometime next week? Very typical email that you might get from someone like us. I don't know, do your emails? That's what all my emails sound. We apparently write the same emails.
Same template.
So he didn't write me back. That was in August of 2012. Did not write me back. Then we acquired a kind of a similar company the next year. So in October of 2013, their name came up again, and so I forwarded the first email to him, and I said, hey, it looks like you never responded to this. I'm not sure if you saw, but we just acquired Versafe, this company we acquired, which does this one thing. I was hoping to learn more about your company before we made that decision. A little bit of a dig. However, I believe we have more to build out in our security portfolio, and I'd really love to meet you to understand where your company fits in. Perhaps, I could stop by to introduce myself. Let me know. So I end it with, let me know if you're open to an informal introductory discussion. So this was the email he wrote back. Andrew, congrats on your acquisition. I received your email previously. We were then and are now in stealth, so would not have been able to tell you enough for you to draw any conclusions. All right. And this was the part I really liked. We get inbound offers for M&A pretty often, but I doubt we're in a range that could work for you. It would take $600 million or so at this point for us to be interested. Thanks, Joe Blow. That is a terrible, terrible email to send. I mean, he's acknowledged that he's blown me off. He's said that he kind of doesn't trust me enough to talk, even though, stealth doesn't, as you know, it doesn't mean secret. It just means you haven't launched yet. And then he's just thrown this number out, dude, we haven't even gone on a date yet, So anyway, don't write that email.
Where are you today?
I have to say, I'm a little bit happy to say the company is not doing well today.
A little Schadenfreude never hurt anyone.
It is tough, man. I heard recently that they're having trouble raising money and they may have to start laying people off. And I have to say, a little part of me. I mean, I spend most of my time with entrepreneurs.
Don't tweet that. He's not really that evil.
Internally, but that definitely was one where I was like, all right, goes around, comes around.
Switching gears a little bit. So Debra, getting back to the title of demystifying, what's a common misconception about corp dev teams and engagement?
A common misconception about corp dev teams and engagement. I think maybe the most common one is the time that it actually takes the process to run through. There is a clock which is an enterprise clock, and it's very different from that of a startup. And so the entire process from beginning to end can take anywhere from, I think the fastest we've ever done a deal is around 4 months, up to, literally years. We've done dances with teams for years where we've engaged and then said no, and we've backed off, and then we've come back in again and ultimately ended up with a deal. So, coming in and thinking that it's going to be the only priority that we have and that you'll get responded quickly all the time is not really realistic in the enterprise world.
Got it. Helder, tell us about a deal that got away despite your best efforts.
Another security company. It's funny, similar to your situation, they were on the radar from a technology perspective. We courted them. They played hard to get, not quite that bad. We courted them actually pretty hard because they were a really good fit. And the deal in the end ended up falling through mostly because of personalities. So the technology was a really good fit, but the people were not, and they also felt the same of us. And those are tough deals because you've got the BU screaming and the sales guy saying, if we have and add that to our portfolio, we can uptick another 10% of revenue next year. So get it. And in the end, you can't do it because you know if you cross that bridge, you're probably setting up an integration disaster, and then it's everybody's neck. So it was, and this was fairly recent, actually, before the last one, and it was somebody that has also gone on to be acquired by somebody else.
So I won't give you a hard one now. More practical advice. How should founders decide whether to take a second or third meeting?
Well, so first of all, always take the first meeting, I think. I mean, it's that opening
blow
the
you off
lines.
over email.
Don't blow me off over email. It's worth it just to open the lines of communication. I do think that's a big thing. At some point, it probably does make sense for you to call us on, what are your intentions. I think I respect CEOs who do that because it's very easy for us to say, who'd be really interested in this? Dave would be interested. You have a meeting and like, that was a really good meeting, Bill will be really interested in that. And I certainly try not to do that to companies, but if you feel that that's happening, you're very small, folks like us are large in comparison, so it's easy to just get marched around, show and tell. And it's perfectly fair just to say, look, we're a small company and we got a business to run. We kind of need to know what your intentions are. But I think, take a meeting or two first.
And is there any information that founders should keep close to the vest that sometimes maybe not as good corp dev folks as you guys are going to try to pry out of them that could end up hurting their business? Deborah?
I actually think that the more transparency and the more that's communicated to the corp dev organization, the more likely it will get to a deal that works. I think I'll sort of turn that on its side a little bit as a question and say it's really important that you guys understand and know your business really well and also understand what kind of scrutiny your business is going to come under if we do get into an LOI and make our way through a deal. I'm sort of continually amazed at the things that we find out about companies that the CEO didn't know about their company, or that they just didn't understand the implications of when it happened. So.
I would also say, I mean, the advice I usually give CEOs is, if you have IP that just telling us about it reveals it, I don't think you're solving a very hard problem. That may not actually be intellectual property. But if there are things that you feel like we have really solved a hard problem and we're working on a patent on it or whatever, we truly, then fair enough, just draw a box around it and say yeah, we'll have a meeting with you, but when you ask us about this one thing, we're just not going to tell you, and that's fine. Again, it's just transparency. There's no reason to be cloak and dagger about it.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, that comes down to your initial comment about this is a relationship, right? I mean, ultimately, we want to consummate this deal. We want to, bring you into the family, and so there has to be trust. I mean, if it's after the first, second, third meeting, if there isn't trust, then something isn't functioning right? So from that perspective, complete openness, and absolutely, there are situations you do need to draw a box around certain elements of the discussions. We respect that, we understand that, but complete openness, transparency, clear objectives.
Are you open back in return in terms of your product roadmap at Cisco and how this could align with that?
Absolutely. Actually, that's actually a must, because
so both sides really have to be
both sides have to understand what they're getting into, right? I mean, not to beat a dead horse. I mean, he make sure that you're going to get along, you're going to align, the integration is going to be doable. Because we've learned this from past mistakes. We've done 170 acquisitions in the last 20 years. Pretty well-oiled machine now. It wasn't always like that, I mean, you guys have heard of flip cameras and Linksys and things that didn't quite fit. No, and we're very open about it. I mean, you have to learn from your mistakes. And I think the number one thing is really this clear, open communication, clear objectives from both sides. And if it fits, fantastic. Let's figure out where we, dot the I's and cross the T's. If it doesn't, then it doesn't.
Last question, Debra. If you think about companies that CA acquires, what percent of them have you partnered with in the past, had some sort of relationship, maybe strategic investment or something of that sort?
Yeah, so a large percentage of the companies that we acquire, we have some kind of relationship with before we do an acquisition. You know, in some cases it may be, you know, an OEM relationship. In some cases it may be, you know, a partnership, you know, a looser partnership, like a relationship through an integration or a technology partnership. In some cases, we're a customer, you know, and that's how we have that relationship, or we co-sell products or technologies to some of our larger clients. So quite a few of them. It's not entirely, but often. I mean, that's the best way for us to really find out whether or not the technology and the product and the company is going to be a fit for us and is going to actually, you know, work in the portfolio.
And last question before audience Q&A to Helder. If you guys each have relatively smaller corp dev teams, but if we look at Cisco, it's a pretty big behemoth. How should folks navigate that company in finding folks like you?
Good question. We'd like to think we're friendly. We'd like to think that we're distributed enough that although it is a large group, we actually have a group within Corp Dev that's totally dedicated towards facilitating these sorts of things. So from that perspective, when you engage, you know, whether it's through, you know, ad hoc meeting or so through an event or whatever, we try to ensure that the proper liaison for all of these different functions and people inside Cisco is appointed or assigned to these discussions. And so we try to basically appoint a point person that can help you navigate through all of this. But we also, again, from experience and being a fairly well-oiled machine, try to actually help and facilitate a lot of these discussions by not, at least a priori, burdening small companies with a whole lot of overhead. But having said that, process is process, and as things go deeper, we have been accused of, you know, invading small companies with an army of corp dev people to get the deal done to where we didn't quite fit into those conference rooms. So we've learned from that, and so we now try to basically be a bit softer, a bit gentler, and maybe do things in stages rather than overwhelm people all at once. But that's a very good question. I don't think there's a one shoe fits all. I think it'll vary on the different engagements that we come across.
Gotcha. Let's turn it over to the audience. Any questions?
Hi, so I'll admit I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to the value of acquisition. Though I've been impressed with how you guys are also here today. So my question related is, do you guys track success metrics against your acquisitions and, you know, and build stats? You know, whether you're achieving, you know, whatever goal you set out deal by deal, how do those look? What's the success rate by whatever measure you guys apply?
The question, just to repeat it for everyone, is do they track success metrics and how are you doing against those goals?
So the question is absolutely. Otherwise, we wouldn't have acquired 170 companies in the last 20 years. We're actually doing very well. Actually, if you read the press, we're probably one of the most successful acquirers. In terms of what those metrics look like, most of them are sort of internal. I can't share specifics. But part of our strategy is to build, buy, and partner. And the buy part, I can tell you, has been very active in the last few years and is about to get even more active. So without sharing the details of those metrics, I can say that we like what we see, and we'll continue to do more of the same.
Anything else to add?
Oh, our metrics on acquisition progress is board level. So they are tracked and reported on, you know, quarterly to the board. It's a really important thing, particularly for a company like Cisco Technologies, which does a lot of acquisitions as well. You know, some of the acquisitions are really great and really successful, and some of them are, you know, are less so. We almost always get something really valuable out of them, even if it's only the talent of the people that came in through the acquisition, even if the synergy that, you know, we planned for in the business case doesn't pan out. Andrew and I were talking about this today, when you take a look at where those people are, then in the organization, 4 or 5 years later, they're embedded in really, essential parts of the organization and contributing very significantly.
I have a question that I'd love to get an answer from all of you, but it touches on something that Debra spoke to a few moments ago about having a relationship, prior relationship of some kind with companies that you end up purchasing. In a case, for example, the company that I run is a very early stage startup, which of course is not for M&A right now, but would you, for example, say that your company might sometimes be an early adopter of certain technology coming from a very early stage company, certain report that it's of interest and of use to you, being an early adopter of a technology with a foresight of saying, let's see how this works for us and how it grows, and maybe someday it can become something big that would be valuable to us to acquire.
So that has happened. It's not the typical route, right? The typical route is really seeing you in our customers, because we're not actually typical of our customers. We're too small to be typical of most of our customers.
I'd say we have some labs that are suited to playing with new technologies. It depends on the technology. Our IT department doesn't love hearing from me every week with like, can you try this? Can you try? I mean, hundreds of companies, they just can't try all this stuff. They've got to keep the business up and running.
Is it better for you, just on that point, for a startup to show that they have traction with someone else? Like, hey, we have early POCs at banks or something?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, customer traction is huge. But I want to address you're speaking. How can you get traction within our company, right? Our IT
Essentially,
group.
a cybersecurity startup with a great technology. Ask Helder. I told him. He said that it's interesting.
Yeah, I want to hear about that, by the way. Come to us first.
So, specifically in cybersecurity, which all three companies have an interest in. If you see that this is something different, unique, not typical, would you open the door? Let's say that we had a conversation, you thought it was interesting enough from the business perspective, perhaps. Would you open the door, facilitate us talking to the right people within your organization to maybe become an early adopter, and then, of course, that relationship grows. But is that something that you, from your position, would try to facilitate?
Yeah, I mean, in my position, the answer is, if we find cool technology, but it's just super early like yours, it's like, and it hasn't been proven out yet, we will become champions for that in our organization and try and find, it's Cisco, they've got a list of great resources. My list is a little scrappier, but it might be like, hey, I happen to know a customer that might be interested in that, and I could make a selective introduction. I'm not going to introduce you to our sales force. I know you want that, but you're not going to get up on stage and present our sales force. But I might know a customer, there might be an internal project. But look, that's diligence for us, right? We're like, that looks really cool. I kind of want to know if it works. Let's see if we can figure it out.
Yeah, and actually in the last 18 months, we've been expanding those opportunities to the extent that it may not be an opportunity to insert the technology for review inside Cisco, but it could be inside one of our various IoT centers with a partner. It could be with some of the incubators and accelerators that we partner with. But if, let's say for argument's sake, it was the right technology, it was the right fit, early stage or not, our IT actually has a program which we call the Enterprise in Residency program that allows for that type of function to occur. But they're very rigorous, so we have to convince them. But the answer to your question is that vehicle does exist, but because of the size of the company, we have various vehicles at your disposal to ensure that if it's something of interest, we're not going to just look at it and let it go away and end up somewhere else.
We have time for one more quickie, and then the rest folks can ask the panelists after.
What do you guys think of these investment banker guys? Do you think of phone calls? I mean, what goes through your mind when you get a phone call from one of those?
Like specifically someone who is selling us a company?
Yeah.
Or
Personally, I don't take a whole lot of those calls. Again, it really comes down to, we have a very extensive, I like to call them multiple input channels of innovation. And the biggest challenge we have as a company that's 70,000 people, $50 billion all over the world, is really weeding through all of those input channels to see what is really relevant and makes sense for us. For somebody to ping us out of left field about, hey, have I got a deal for you, that tends to sort of fall very, very low on our radar. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Great. And before wrapping up, I'm going to ask.
but likewise, if it's like, man, that is just not even on our radar, then by all means, go build it. So it's in both of our interests to point you towards the white spaces, and that's why, we firmly believe in that model.
Yeah, I mean, more of the same. And again, we're just people like you guys. Some of us have diverse backgrounds, have been there. More importantly, it's just, not to use that old cliche, the win-win, but it truly has to be that, right? At the end of the day, it has to be something that works for all interested parties. If it's not, then most likely it isn't going to come together.
Yeah, I think that, Andrew mentioned something about this being like mating, but it's really a marriage, and like any other relationship, it takes sometimes a long time to develop it, and it's worthwhile getting to know people well, before you make that commitment. And so, even well before you're interested in selling, just getting on our radar, making sure we know who you are. It helps a lot. It really does. It helps on both sides. It helps build, that relationship over time, and it makes for a more successful integration at the end.
Great. Let's give a round of applause for our panel. Thanks, everyone, for coming out tonight.